Toy Story 5 is officially on the way, and on the surface, everything feels familiar. The toys are back, the animation looks better than ever, and the franchise everyone grew up with is returning once again. But the more Pixar reveals, the more confusing things become. Because behind the excitement, there are major questions this movie still hasn't answered. And until it does, Toy Story 5 feels less like a continuation, and more like a mystery. So let's talk about the 9 biggest questions Toy Story 5 absolutely needs to answer. Starting with the one that confused everyone the moment it was announced. Question 1. Why is Woody back, and where has he been? Woody has always been the heart of Toy Story. No matter how much Buzz, Jessie, or the rest of the gang grew over the years, the story always came back to the cowboy. His loyalty, his fear of being replaced, his need to belong, which is exactly why Toy Story 4 felt like a clear ending for him. By the time that movie ended, Woody had finally made a choice that went against everything he believed at the start of the franchise. He walked away from having an owner. He chose freedom. He chose Bo Peep. And, most importantly, he accepted that his job as a child's toy was finished. That ending wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't open-ended. It felt intentional. So when Pixar revealed that Woody would be appearing in Toy Story 5, fans immediately had questions. Not because they didn't want him back, but because the ending of Toy Story 4 strongly suggested his story was complete. What makes this even stranger is how Pixar's marketing has handled his return. In promotional material, Woody is shown standing alongside Buzz Lightyear and the rest of the toys that now belong to Bonnie. There's no explanation, no hint that he left, no sign that he's living a separate life with Bo Peep. He simply appears, as if nothing ever changed. Even in the teaser, Woody is positioned next to Buzz in a way that visually implies he's still part of the same group. For casual viewers, it almost looks like Toy Story 4 never happened. Now, there is an important detail to keep in mind here. Pixar teasers are often misleading. They're not always made up of real scenes from the final movie. Sometimes they exist purely to showcase animation quality or tone, rather than story accuracy. That means Woody appearing early in the teaser doesn't necessarily confirm he starts the movie with the others. In fact, there's a strong chance that Woody won't be part of the main group at the beginning at all. He could appear later. He could cross paths with the toys due to the events of the story. Or he could return only temporarily before leaving again. But that raises another question. If Woody's return is temporary, why bring him back at all? Toy Story has always been careful with its endings. Toy Story 3 ended Andy's chapter. Toy Story 4 ended Woody's. Bringing him back without a clear purpose risks undoing one of the franchise's most emotionally mature conclusions, unless Toy Story 5 plans to recontextualize that ending entirely. Which leads directly to the next big question. Question 2. Is Toy Story 5 a reboot, or something else entirely? One of the most confusing statements surrounding Toy Story 5 didn't come from Pixar's trailers or posters. It came from an interview. Tim Allen, the voice of Buzz Lightyear, described Toy Story 5 as a total reboot, and that one phrase completely changed the conversation. A reboot usually means starting over, a reset, a version of the story where previous events are ignored or reimagined. If Toy Story 5 is truly a reboot, that would mean the first 4 movies essentially don't count in this version of the story. Suddenly, Woody being back with the group would make sense. His departure in Toy Story 4 wouldn't have happened. The emotional finality wouldn't exist. But here's the problem. Pixar's own marketing contradicts the reboot idea. Characters introduced in Toy Story 4, like Forky, are confirmed to be in Toy Story 5. Bonnie is still the owner of the toys, not Andy. If Pixar wanted to fully restart the story, they could have easily made Andy a child again and introduced everything from scratch. They didn't. So, what does reboot actually mean in this context? One possibility is that Toy Story 5 is a soft reboot. In other words, the previous movie still happened, but the story is designed so that new audiences can jump in without watching all 4 earlier films. The characters have history, but the plot doesn't depend on deep knowledge of it. This would explain why the marketing feels familiar, why Woody appears with the group, why the movie seems to re-establish the status quo visually, even if the emotional history still exists underneath. Another possibility is that the reboot comment was misunderstood or overstated. Actors don't always have the full picture, especially early in production. What might feel like a reboot from a performance or tone standpoint may not actually reset canon at all. And there's a third, more interesting possibility. Toy Story 5 might be a thematic reboot, not a narrative one. Instead of focusing on replacement anxiety or growing up, the franchise could be resetting its core conflict. The toys are no longer worried about being replaced by other toys. They're worried about being replaced by technology. Screens, tablets, digital attention. In that sense, Toy Story 5 isn't erasing the past, it's shifting the battlefield. But until Pixar clarifies what reboot truly means, this question hangs over the entire movie. Because depending on the answer, Toy Story 5 is either continuing a legacy or quietly redefining it. And that uncertainty affects every other question still to come. Question 3. What is the role of the Buzz Lightyear Army, and are they friends or a threat? One of the few concrete details we've been given about Toy Story 5 is the appearance of an entire army of Buzz Lightyear toys. And on paper, that sounds like pure fan service. Buzz Lightyear has always been one of the most entertaining characters in the franchise, especially when the story leans into his confusion about being a toy rather than a real space ranger. According to Tim Allen, the scenes involving the Buzz Lightyear army are meant to be hilarious and will echo the humor of the first Toy Story, when Buzz genuinely believed he was a heroic intergalactic soldier. That alone sets expectations high. But humor aside, there's a much bigger question here. Why does this army exist, and what purpose do they serve in the story? So far, Pixar hasn't clarified whether these Buzz Lightyears are allies, enemies, or something in between. And that distinction matters a lot. If they're antagonistic, they could represent outdated ideas of heroism, toys stuck in the past, unable to adapt to a world that no longer plays the way it used to. If they're allies, they might become an unexpected force that helps the main group confront the film's larger conflict with technology. There's also the possibility that their role changes over time. They could start as a problem and later become part of the solution. That would fit Toy Story's long-standing tradition of turning misunderstandings into growth. Think about how Buzz himself went from rival to best friend in the original film. An entire army repeating that arc, but on a larger scale, would feel both familiar and fitting. One specific moment that's already been teased involves a plane crash that leaves the Buzz Lightyear army stranded on an island, clearly referencing Castaway. Pixar loves these kinds of nods to older films, especially ones that adults will recognize instantly while kids simply enjoy the surface-level chaos. But even that gag raises questions. How does this army get involved in the main plot? And how do they eventually reconnect with Woody, Buzz, and the rest of the toys? More importantly, what does this army say about Buzz himself? Buzz Lightyear has spent 4 movies growing into his identity. He's no longer confused about who he is. He understands his purpose. Seeing hundreds of versions of himself who haven't gone through that growth could force Buzz to confront his own past in a new way. He's not just helping other toys anymore. He's mentoring versions of himself who are stuck where he used to be. Whether they end up as comic relief, a temporary obstacle, or a full-blown supporting force, the Buzz Lightyear army isn't just there for laughs. Their presence hints at one of Toy Story 5's biggest themes: what happens to toys who never get the chance to grow beyond their original programming? And that question ties directly into the next mystery. Question 4. Why is Jessie the protagonist this time? For the first time in the franchise, Toy Story 5 is shifting its focus away from Woody and Buzz and placing Jessie at the center of the story. And while Jessie has always been a fan favorite, this creative choice raises several questions that Pixar hasn't answered yet. So far, nothing in the marketing clearly explains why Jessie is the one driving the plot. The main conflict appears to revolve around technology stealing Bonnie's attention, particularly through a tablet. But Jessie isn't Bonnie's favorite toy. That role belongs to Forky, who was literally created by Bonnie and became emotionally essential to her in Toy Story 4. Forky even appears in the teaser, yet he hasn't been positioned as the emotional lead at all. So why Jessie? One explanation could be emotional vulnerability. Jessie's backstory is one of the most heartbreaking in the entire franchise. She knows what it feels like to be abandoned, forgotten, and left behind. If Bonnie's attention shifts almost entirely to technology, Jessie may experience that fear more intensely than any other toy, not because it's new, but because she's lived it before. There's also the possibility that Jessie's leadership emerges out of necessity rather than choice. Buzz Lightyear's actor has hinted that Jessie will be in trouble and will need help. At the same time, the toys will be scattered across different locations for reasons we don't yet understand. That suggests a fractured story structure, where Jessie becomes the emotional anchor trying to reunite everyone. But this only raises more questions. Why are the toys separated in the first place? What kind of trouble is Jessie in? And why does this situation force her, specifically, to take charge? Jessie has always been brave, but she's also been secondary. She supported Woody, she followed Buzz, she filled gaps in the group dynamic. Toy Story 5 might finally be asking what happens when Jessie has no one to follow, when she has to lead without reassurance. That shift could be incredibly powerful. Jessie stepping into the protagonist role represents a generational handoff within the franchise itself. Woody's arc has reached emotional closure. Buzz's growth has stabilized. Jessie still has unresolved space to explore, especially in a world where toys are no longer competing with other toys, but with devices designed to monopolize attention completely. By making Jessie the central character, Toy Story 5 signals that this story isn't just about legacy characters returning. It's about redefining who gets to matter when the rules of play change. And that makes Jessie's journey one of the most important questions the movie needs to answer. Question 5. Is Lily Pad the true villain, or a symptom of something bigger? One of the most unsettling elements introduced in Toy Story 5 isn't a toy at all. It's a tablet. Specifically a children's tablet known as Lily Pad. From the moment it appears in the teaser, the tone shifts. The toys don't react with curiosity or jealousy the way they did when Buzz first arrived in Toy Story 1. They react with fear. Not confusion, not annoyance, fear, which immediately tells us that Lilypad represents a very different kind of threat. Unlike previous antagonists, Lilypad isn't competing for attention in the same way. It doesn't sit on the floor. It doesn't wait to be played with. It actively pulls attention toward itself. And that's a crucial distinction. Toys can be ignored, but they still exist in the same physical space as a child. Technology replaces that space entirely. What truly makes Lilypad disturbing, though, is the implication that it's watching. One of the promotional posters shows Woody, Buzz, and Jessie staring directly at Lilypad's screen. Their reflections are visible. There's a small green indicator light turned on, the kind that only appears when a device is recording. That detail alone changes everything, because if Lilypad is recording the toys while they move, then for the first time in the franchise, the toy's greatest secret is actively under threat. And that raises the biggest question of all. Why would Lilypad want proof? Is this blackmail? Is it curiosity? Or is Lilypad simply doing what technology does best, collecting data without considering the consequences? What complicates this even further is Pixar's own messaging around the film. Director Andrew Stanton has been very clear about one thing. Toy Story 5 isn't meant to demonize technology itself. The theme isn't technology is evil. It's that toys are being forgotten in a world where screens dominate attention. That distinction matters. Because if Lilypad is meant to represent technology as a whole, then making it a purely evil villain would undermine the film's central message. It would be too simple. Too easy, which leads to a more unsettling possibility. Lilypad may not see itself as a villain at all. From its perspective, recording isn't malicious, it's functional, it's how devices operate. But for toys who rely on secrecy to survive, that functionality becomes existentially dangerous. Lilypad doesn't need to want to expose the toys. Exposure could simply be a side effect of how it exists. That makes Lilypad less of a traditional antagonist and more of a force of inevitability. A reminder that the world has changed in ways the toys can't control. And that kind of threat is far more difficult to confront, because there's no clear solution. You can't defeat it, you can only adapt to it. Which brings us to the next question. Question 6. Will Bonnie finally discover the toys are alive? For nearly 3 decades, Toy Story has revolved around one unbreakable rule. Humans must never know the toys are alive. Andy never found out. His parents never found out. Teachers, neighbors, strangers, none of them ever crossed that line, and that rule has defined the entire franchise. But Lilypad recording the toys opens a door Toy Story has never walked through before. Because if there's video evidence, secrecy becomes almost impossible to maintain. And the most likely person to see that footage isn't a random adult, it's Bonnie. So the question isn't just can Bonnie find out, it's what happens if she does. If Bonnie discovers the truth, Toy Story changes forever. The relationship between child and toy would no longer be built on imagination alone. It would become a partnership, a dialogue, and while that might sound comforting at first, it also raises serious consequences. Would Bonnie tell anyone else? Could she keep a secret this big? And how would the toys feel knowing their entire existence now depends on a human's discretion? At the same time, there's something oddly hopeful about this possibility. Bonnie is not Andy. She's grown up in a different world, one where technology is normal, where secrets are harder to keep, where boundaries between imagination and reality are already blurred. If any child were to learn the truth and respond with understanding rather than fear, it would be her. The toys might even feel relief. After all, living in constant fear of being discovered has always shaped their behavior. Knowing that at least one human understands them could change how they see themselves. It could even allow them to solve problems together instead of hiding from them. And yet, this is a line Pixar has never crossed for a reason. Once the secret is out, it can't be put back. Future movies would have to deal with that reality. The stakes of every story would change. The rules of the universe would shift. That's why this question feels so important. Toy Story 5 has the opportunity to either preserve the franchise's most sacred rule, or finally let it evolve. If Bonnie doesn't find out, then Lilypad's threat must be resolved another way. If she does, Toy Story enters completely new territory. Either choice is risky, but standing still may be the riskiest option of all. Question 7. Will Andy return? And should he? Ever since Toy Story 5 was announced, one name has hovered over the conversation like a ghost from the past. Andy. For many fans, Andy isn't just a character. He's the emotional anchor of the entire franchise. We grew up with him, we aged alongside him, and when he gave his toys away in Toy Story 3, it felt like a genuine goodbye, not just for the toys, but for a chapter of our own lives. That's why the possibility of Andy returning is so powerful, and also so dangerous. From a narrative standpoint, his return would be devastating in the best way. Woody and the others believe they'll never see Andy again. Reuniting with him, even briefly, would be like reconnecting with a childhood friend you never expected to meet again. It would instantly raise the emotional stakes and tap into deep nostalgia for adult viewers. But here's the problem. Toy Story 3 worked because it let Andy go. Bringing him back risks undoing that finality. If Andy casually appears again, it could cheapen one of Pixar's most emotionally mature endings. The goodbye mattered because it was permanent, because life moved forward. That's why if Andy does return, it can't be incidental, it can't be fan service, it has to mean something. One possibility is that Andy doesn't interact with the toys at all. He could appear briefly as an adult, perhaps in passing, reinforcing the idea that the toys are now fully part of someone else's life. Another option is far more dramatic. Andy returning during a moment of crisis, not to reclaim the toys, but to unknowingly help them move forward. And of course, there's the marketing angle. If Andy is in the movie, Pixar would likely hide it as long as possible. Revealing his return in a trailer would immediately overshadow every other plot point. Saving that reveal for the theater would make it far more impactful. The real question isn't whether Andy can return. It's whether the story actually needs him. Toy Story 5 is already about change, obsolescence, and adaptation. Andy represents the past. Bringing him back only works if his presence reinforces the idea that letting go was the right choice all along. Question 8. Will Lilypad be redeemed, or remain a villain? Up to this point, Lilypad has been framed as one of Pixar's most unsettling antagonists. Manipulative, observant, quietly invasive, but that framing may not tell the whole story. Andrew Stanton has been clear about one thing. Toy Story 5 is not meant to demonize technology. That matters, because if Lilypad represents technology as a whole, then portraying her as irredeemably evil would send the wrong message. Technology isn't the problem. Unchecked use is. This opens the door to a potential redemption arc. Instead of being destroyed or defeated, Lilypad could be recontextualized. She might learn to coexist with toys rather than replace them. Bonnie could be taught to divide her attention, using technology as a tool instead of a substitute for imagination. In that scenario, Lilypad isn't the villain, she's the test. But redemption doesn't mean harmless. Even if Lilypad changes, the damage she represents has already been done. The toys have been forced to confront a future where children may never need them the way they once did. That realization doesn't disappear just because Lilypad stops recording. Alternatively, Lilypad may represent the harmful side of technology exclusively: addiction, surveillance, overstimulation. If that's the case, she may remain a villain until the end, serving as a cautionary figure rather than a partner. Either direction carries weight. A redemption arc aligns with Pixar's nuanced storytelling. A full villain arc preserves the toy's sense of urgency and loss. What matters most is consistency. Lilypad can't be both a misunderstood victim and a manipulative threat without clear intent. Toy Story 5 needs to decide what technology represents: balance, danger, or inevitability. Question 9. What happens to Forky? Out of all the characters introduced in Toy Story 4, Forky had the biggest emotional impact. He wasn't just a toy, he was an idea, a symbol of how children create meaning out of anything. And yet, despite appearing in the teaser for Toy Story 5, Forky has been almost completely absent from marketing discussion. That absence is suspicious. Forky should be the character most affected by Lilypad. Bonnie created him, loved him, chose him. If her attention shifts to a tablet, Forky would feel that loss more intensely than anyone. His entire identity is built on being wanted. So why hasn't Pixar emphasized his role? One possibility is that Forky's arc this time is quieter, more internal. Instead of panicking or becoming jealous like Woody once did, Forky might confront obsolescence in a more existential way. He already questioned his purpose in Toy Story 4. Now that question returns, but without an easy answer. Another possibility is that Forky represents resilience. Unlike mass-produced toys or advanced technology, he exists because Bonnie imagined him into being. No update can replace that. In a world dominated by screens, Forky could become the ultimate reminder that creativity doesn't need batteries. If Toy Story 5 wants to make its message land, Forky can't be sidelined. He embodies the franchise's core idea more purely than almost any other character. Toy Story 5 isn't just another sequel. It's a crossroads between toys and technology, between nostalgia and change, between what Toy Story has always been and what it might become next. Whether it's Woody's return, Jessie's leadership, Lilypad's threat, or the secrets the toys have protected for decades. One thing is clear, this movie has a lot to answer for, and that's exactly why we're all watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, there are more waiting on screen right now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.